welcome. Thanks very much for coming, and to Tadhg Coakley Diarmuid Lyng. I think it's a welcome home of sorts. I don't know where else to start other than just the visceral experience that I had reading the book. I came down. I was just talking to Tadhg inside, and I was telling him that I came down. I've got 2 small kids at home, so sleep doesn't come so often, and they get into a rhythm, and sometimes they sleep in, and I still woke up at like 5 o'clock last Tuesday morning, and I said, right, I'll go down and get a bit of work done. And I had 5 or 6 things that I had to do, and then there was one thing that I wanted to do, and that was to pick up the book and read it. Maybe at the cost of not doing the other things as well as just wanting to read the book. And I found myself about an hour in, maybe from the 20th, in particular from about the 20th page to the 40th or 50th page, just overwhelmed, completely and utterly overwhelmed, like really, like, when I say overwhelmed, I mean like I was bawling my eyes out, sending my father a text message on WhatsApp to tell him, like, thank you. Just thank you for keeping me involved in this game. Thank you for introducing me to this game. Thank you for giving it to us and for keeping us involved and for setting us off on the journey to where I could read a book like that and understand very, very, very intensely what it is you were talking about. And I think in relation to some of the retreats, like some of that is kind of men's work, and I'm meeting that bit of a constack that's there to get that emotional understanding across and that communication across. And it seems that sport, I've always known that sport has been a great vehicle for it, I suppose, but to see it, to give my thoughts a line of words that made sense in that way, and then all of a sudden a few things dropped into place, and I was like, oh yeah, that's what it is, that's what I remember of it. So thanks for that experience, first of all.
Thank you, Diarmuid, and thanks for a lovely introduction. That's very moving, and I was delighted when I heard that Diarmuid was going to be interviewing me today. I was absolutely thrilled because I knew you'd get it.
Yeah, I got it for sure. I remember when I was doing the Laker Gael a couple of years ago, we were up in Dublin for it, and Kieran Donaghy was sitting behind me, the star, and I was very aware that Star was behind me. I've met him a couple of times, and I know him to be a super nice fella. Yeah. And the format of the program is that they show one of the 6, I think there's 6 documentaries made, and they show one of those 6 documentaries, maybe 15 minutes of it, and in that time, like, Star just laid it all out on the table, like totally bare. And when they finished, I turned around to him, and he wasn't the fella who I had been consciously aware of on my shoulder anymore. I now knew all of these things about him, but I hadn't gone on the journey of a relationship with him in the same way. Like, I had just watched something, but I turned around with all this knowledge now as if he was my best friend and someone who I could, like, I wanted to hug him, and because it was just so lovely. And I was wondering about that for the book. Have you had that experience where, I suppose, people are, you've opened up so much, and you've opened up so much of yourself, and that seemed to be a very specific desire. And have you had that experience of people responding with this depth where you haven't traveled that in the relationship with that person?
That's right. I have hugely, Diarmuid, amount of people who told me they phoned their fathers, and people have shared stories, very difficult stories about their fathers who weren't supportive and all that. And I'm not a counsellor, and when people contact me, I don't know, what am I going to say to these people? I mean, some people had very, bad family experiences, and I had a great experience growing up, but a lot of people have, burst out into tears in front of me and hugged me and so on, and it's been overwhelming, really, because I never expected that reaction, really.
Why not?
I don't know.
Have you not? You definitely seem to have a desire to unveil something. Is it out of not having done that before that you weren't expecting it?
I'm a fairly introverted person, I'm not a kind of an outgoing person, really, and talking about myself comes difficult, really, but Yeah, people have been amazing and supportive. And one fella rang me he said, "My wife is crying over there because of you. You should have had a blubber, a warning on the front of the book." And he said to her, "What's wrong with you?" And she says, "Tadhg Coakley made me cry." But anyway, well, it's good to cry, yeah.
Yeah. It is. It's good to get your release. It's good to get the release.
Yeah.
I suppose I was wondering when I was reading it, why did you want to? There's maybe a time that we all get at some stage where we want to wipe the slate clean and say, "This is my lot," and it can be hard to go up against the persona that you've created, which is like lovely and comfortable, and you're able to navigate the world with it. And all of a sudden, then you're like, "No, I'm going to just maybe bear all of that so I can start afresh," or what was the reason for wanting to go that way?
My first book came out in 2018, and it's a sports novel around a fictional Ireland hurling final. And I went to an event that summer with Elizabeth Strout in Boris, County Carlow, a literary event. She's one of my favourite writers. And Sinead Gleeson asked her, "When are you going to write a memoir, especially about your mother?" Because all her books have a mother-daughter relationship, which is very interesting, and it's obviously her. And she said, "I'm never going to write a memoir, ever," because she said, "I want to hide behind the characters in my novels." And I realized in my book that I was hiding behind the characters in the novel too. And unlike her, I said, my wife Keir was sitting beside me there, and I said, "I'm going to have to write about myself. I'm going to have to do it." And it was difficult, but where do you start, And I never thought I would write a memoir. I mean, I haven't played at the top level at all, but I started. I did a workshop with Sinead Gleeson in Bantry that summer, later that summer, and she gave us an exercise to write about the one thing you don't want to think about or write about at all. And, grief is the one thing you don't want to write about. And so I started in the 2 essays, Miracles and Kisses, at that workshop, yeah.
Sorry, now I had a question in my head there, and of course it went off. Micheál O'Donoghue coming home, there's a really expansive idea in that I don't think is... I suppose I witnessed it one time before in the documentary on Jim Steins, which had a profound effect on me the first time I saw it, and every time since afterwards. There's a scene where maybe 20 of the original facilitators who worked for this foundation, they would go and they would run stuff on the Hero's Journey, which is Joseph Campbell's, many people know Joseph Campbell's work on the Hero's Journey. And at that moment, when Jim Steins faces the 20 people who he started the foundation with, basically, and I'd gotten to know a couple of them as well, and it was lovely to just to witness them, witnessing him, because he was the Irishman, and these were all Australians, you know. And it seemed like he created an organisation to the scale, and Reach was a big scale and was doing a lot of big work, but it needed something that big for him to have his moment of surrender. And in the room at that time, he realizes like this. It was absolutely not created for him, but yet it was the only thing of that size and of that nature that could actually heal a part of him that was, fundamentally broken. And I was wondering about that with Micheál O'Donoghue. The first thing was, it was like, you seem to be suggesting that he was like, he told his dad going out the door, like, nobody else is going to do it, so I'm going to go up and get that cup and bring it back to you. That was the first thing. And the second part of it, similar to the Jim Steins story, is that he almost went on that journey so that he could have that healing moment with his father. It's totally unrelated in so many respects, but there is a different dimension in which that's what he did.
Yeah, and it's an amazing photo. If you don't know the photo, it's the coach of Galway won the All-Ireland, and he brings the cup back over to Shannon, which is a big moment for them. And his father's in a wheelchair in Ballinasloe, and he puts the cup into his hand. I mean, even thinking about it is emotional now, but it's a wonderful photo. So in the essay Kisses, that had to be one of the kisses that I was going to write about.
Where does it come from, or where do you place your children? The children that you describe in the book. Another part that just, I suppose since I've had kids now, when there's anything about kids, it's kind of changed, you know. And it gutted me, and the people who I've spoken to since about it kind of gutted them in the retelling of it even. Is there do you see like a dimension side by side where they are real, or is...
Well, in a different reality, they are real, but I wanted to, because the reason we play sport is because of emotion, because we feel emotion. And it's why we, interface with music, art, and all those things as well. But sport is very, very good at, drawing out emotion out of people. And I wanted to, as a novelist, there's fiction in the book as well. I wanted to create a visceral, reaction out of the reader, not to describe the emotion, but to show them the emotion, and not even to explain it, but it just draws it out because, when you've suffered grief, and grief is the reason, grief is the cost of love, and when you love, you're going to suffer grief. You are going to, And I wanted to explore that grief. And there's another great photo of a man after the 2018 All-Ireland final, a Limerick man, and his 2 children with him, and he's burst out into tears just at the final whistle. He's inconsolable, and he's hugging his 2 sons, and one of them is looking at him because they're not crying, he's crying. And the reason he's crying is all the grief in his life that he's felt, he's released it in that moment when Limerick won the match. And the funny thing is about children, when they lose, they cry, but when adults win, we cry. And it's just a release. And he said afterwards they never saw him crying before, but he couldn't control it. It was just, it burst out of him.
There's a kind of a battle later in the book with all of the wrongs of sport, all of the darker side of sport, and the addictions that we kind of suffer, and then to arrive at that moment for him, we'll say, for that man who has this release. I suppose I wonder how healthy it is that we need that scale that we need sport to be able to release it. I mean, it doesn't really matter maybe how healthy it is, because maybe that's just the way it is.
And other people would release it in music. A lot of people told me when they went to Leonard Cohen's concert in Dublin, in Dublin Castle, that they just burst into tears the moment he started singing. They couldn't control it because it was waiting for them, to come out. And it's grief, all the loss we have, we have to get it out. Otherwise, it's very unhealthy. So sport is good in that, but the trouble is we have to moderate our emotions too, especially when you hear, mostly men going in, assaulting referees, assaulting children in matches. I mean, that's not on, so we have to moderate those emotions too, because they're powerful. I mean, you know that.
I suppose I'd see it more maybe in relation to, it's maybe more common knowledge now in the last few years that when Liverpool lose, or maybe a football team in the States lose, that then domestic violence goes up, and there's this correlation between the darker aspects of sport. But I don't know, is it just the shadow of people that it comes out in this way? It's aligned with sport, but I don't know necessarily. I don't think it's a cause of it. It's just that's the avenue for it to come out. It
is, unfortunately, and there's just drinking, gambling, and various other kind of things involved in sport too. But in one of the essays in the book, I compare sport with art and the emotional release and so on. But the difference in sport is that it's competitive. There is another in sport where there isn't really an art, and you have to defeat the other, and if you don't, and you have to hate the other sometimes, or you feel you have to, but you don't have to really. So in a way, the book is a call to innocence as well, and especially, with this World Cup starting today, my God, we need innocence.
Is that not what grace is, though? Doesn't grace come from, is it similar to art in that way, or to music? Grace comes from the realization of the pressure and being able to deal with the pressure, and then for you to respond gracefully, almost Yeah.
I think, and it comes from play as well. I mean, the whole sport is based on play. And we learn to play as babies, actually. You know, when you play peekaboo with a baby, the baby realizes it's a game that you're not really hidden, and the baby understands that and enjoys it. And then when they get a bit older, you know, games become a little bit more complex. You know, so you could have a toddler being chased around the garden by her father, and he's pretending to be a monster, you know, this kind of stuff. And the child loves that. It's great fun because, you know, being chased by your father is okay, but being chased by a monster is very, very exciting. I mean, and this is play, and this is, you know, then we learn about organized sports when we go to school and so on, and we want to be part of that. And, you know, it's a great thing, you know. Playing is one of the gifts we have because it comes from imagination and empathy. Play comes from those things. And it's the same in great literature, you know. If you take the book Foster by Claire Keegan, and the film now on Colin Kuhn, you know, at the end of that, there's a child and she's running towards her uncle who has shown her great love that summer, a love she never knew. And when we read that, we become that child. We're running down the road and we're burying our chest into that man's, burying our head into that man's chest. And it's the same in emotion. When we really engage in sport, we become the players on the pitch. And it's a powerful thing.
It's powerful. I suppose I started to track that backwards for a while in Wexford because I had to, because I was lost in my own little sea. And I remember meeting George O'Connor. I mean, George was my friend and my mentor, so I spent a lot of time with him. But it came to a stage where George, you know, jumping George, like this fella was like I don't know how you describe him, but like a Ryder Rovers meets Cuchulainn. Like he just like what a beautiful man in every sense of the word. But he couldn't, and I was standing in front of him as he was doing it, couldn't put one foot in front of the other from his mind, like nothing else. There was no disease, he had no ailments, he had nothing physically wrong with him. He just had lost that faculty to understand. And I would have traced that back, I suppose. I'm not sure if I'm right or not, but I traced it back to the fact that he met constantly the person becoming him, but not having to become him. So he was given the hero status, so that person maybe mightn't have to go on their own heroic journey.
Exactly.
And it's a huge. It weighs down. I think it weighs down athletes, particularly at 33 on, because the curtains falls and there's no more.
Exactly, and there's a huge loss then because you know you're giving up a huge thing really. But George was aware of it. A lot of players aren't, you know, especially superstar kind of millionaire players, soccer players, and so on. They're aware of that, but. It's a burden, you know, to take on all those dreams on your shoulders, and it's definitely a burden, really. But and I played hurling with his brother John as well. He's a lovely fella. Exactly.
Yeah.
I did.
Was he as dirty then as he was at Wexford?
No, a lovely fella. No, he wasn't. No.
Yeah, John was fierce.
No, he
was
is.
Fierce. Yeah, great competitor. I wonder, does some of that come from that there's a real imbalance and you're constantly throughout the book kind of in and out of it, or I'm constantly with you in and out of it trying to understand it because I'm just trying to understand it, I suppose, myself as well. That the competitive aspect of what sport is, and there's a lot of talk at the moment about the win at all costs philosophy and the damage that it does. And you're definitely aware of how the athletic identity can be held over a player to perform whatever a manager or a team decides. So it's like, how do you understand that if it's not win at all costs and it's not art and beauty, which is kind of maybe independent of that competitiveness, where's the middle? Where's the way out for us if we have gone too far down the win at all costs philosophy?
Well, we have to think about it, you know. And you know, there's a World Cup starting today in Qatar, and 6,000 people have died to build the stadiums for this. In a country that's about the size of County Cork, you know, with 300,000 people, indigenous people, and, you know, it's wrong. We have to call it out, and we have to, you know, shame them, really, and say, what are we doing? You know, what are we doing? So, you know, and I'm trying to do that in the book, because sport is about innocence and children, really. And, if we don't teach children, if it's to win at all costs, when does it end? Do you kill someone? You kill 6,000 people, to have a World Cup? It has to stop.
There's a lovely part where you're talking about the Dalai Lama and the volleyball.
That's right, exactly.
The Dalai Lama wasn't playing volleyball in the part of it, but he's talking about the nature of how they're playing. And it comes to, I suppose, a kind of a clash of cultures that's definitely happened and undergone itself in me, in that I don't care. I didn't even know the World Cup was starting today.
Okay.
And I love the World Cup, I really like a World Cup 90 magazine, the stickers and all the stuff. And loved watching it. I'm still amazed by athleticism and the leaps forward that you can make athletically and what people can do, But I've lost interest. I've lost interest in American football. I've lost interest in any of those things because it's become entertainment as opposed to the core of sport.
Industry, really.
And industry. But the Buddhist way isn't our way in some respects. Like, we have a different, like the passion. We come from a little bit of this, whether it's rejected by modern society or not. We still come. Our history is our relationship with the Jesus story, and that's a passionate story. And then the Buddhist story is like detachment and impermanence and the holding back from everything.
I know,
And sometimes I think I'm at a loss for not being as attached to it, because it is a way to work through the emotions, and it is a way to let rip, and it is a way to quieten the mind, because the mind isn't in control so much anymore.
And to accept losing as well, because losing is part of life. Disappointments are part of life, and when children play a sport, if they're taught it in a good way, they learn how to lose as well. They don't want to lose, of course. They're competing, but when you lose, you get on with it and you play the next game and you do the best you can. But if it's win at all costs, it's gone. It's really over.
It's a heavy line for in a sports book. I'm not sure it is a sports book, but it is in some respects. In some respects, it's not. Sport is played by losers. Sport is played by losers for losers. Sport is for losers, played by losers, or something to that effect.
Yeah, I do. Because in a competition,
because it is.
If you have a tennis competition with 120 players, only one is going to lose. 119 are going to lose. Only one is going to win. So, it's part of it, but we don't want to think about it. We don't want to talk about it, and all the attention is on the winner, not the person who overcome, great trials to be there in the first place. No, it's all about the winner, and there's a cult of the winner in sport.
Is the cult of the winner, and I'm just as you're talking about it, is the cult of the winner similar to our unwillingness to experience grief? Because essentially that's why the line is so powerful, because nobody in sport that I've ever heard has ever talked about sport being for losers, and in every sense of it, it is, bar this tiny percentage, and it mirrors maybe our societal inability or lack of desire to experience grief, and yet here we are all playing sport to experience the grief, but absolutely celebrate the person who doesn't seem to have any.
Exactly. And there's a lot of contradictions in sport, and I call out myself, some of my behaviour at matches, and shouting at referees and shouting at different players. And so
people having to move from sitting beside you.
Exactly, a father and son, my God,
It's so hard to imagine it now, sitting here in such a cultured setting, and here's some young fella frightened.
I change, and some of my family changed, very, very quiet people, and the next thing Cork are playing, Jesus Christ, kill him, but we have to be aware of that too, and in the moment it's fine, but then it has to stop.
Yeah. How?
Oh, I don't know.
The rule in
I
our
don't know.
house was we were allowed curse at hurling matches.
Oh, were you? Well, that's
but
very
but
good.
yet, as you were saying at the start, like my father's like he's 6'4" and 17 stone, maybe, you know, he's a fine big man. And I can remember when in '93, I think it was, when Eamon Morrissey scored a late goal. Like I remember the moment, like Jesus, Eamon Morrissey scored a late goal to bring Wexford back from the brink of beating Kilkenny. And earlier on in the game, Wexford had scored a goal, and he was up and he was bawling and he was roaring, and I was just like, I don't remember looking at the field. I was like, wow. And then at the end, he was bawling his eyes out, and I was like, fuck.
Well, that's great. That's the joy of
give me
sport.
this, like, give me this,
Absolutely,
like, give me this. This is
and we want that
beautiful,
too,
like, you know.
and we need it. Why not? You know,
I see with my own youngsters now, like when I teach them, when I try to teach them, you know, I put on my fucking teacher's voice, like, you know, and this is how now you kite the way raw in of Marshin, and it's like it just bypasses them, like it's not a, it doesn't grab the soul in any way, that type of language. Yet if I, you know, kind of show you, and then they're like, okay, I'm with you, you know,
exactly.
There's that real visceral experience that is so, I don't know, it's just so attractive, like.
I know. And a friend of mine told me his son, you know, was involved. He was 10 or 11 or something, and he was playing hurling, and he said, "What do you love most about the hurling?" He said to his son, he said, "I love the fucks. I love the fucking." And after he said, "That's what I love most." Yeah. Straight out. Straight. I love the fucks. Yeah, it's hilarious. Yeah.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah.
Articulate.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I love the fucks. That's a great.
He got it. Yeah.
Is are the GA missing a trick? Are they a little bit like The Game? When you put out a book called The Game, and everybody or so many people who I talk to about hurling automatically go to The Game, as in the game designed by Croke Park or designed by Central kind of order, and then you have to create control around that, and it's GA clubs and it's cones and it's nutritionists and psychologists and all of these, all of this, and then part of me feels like, hang on there now, there's something else here that's also called The Game, and it's wilder and it's more beautiful in its own kind of place. I don't know.
I think so, and there's room for that. Why not, you know, especially underage, you know, young children, just let them play, you know, not even score, let them play, run around, you know, interact, you know, form their identity. Why not do it, you know? And, you know, there's a corporate kind of thinking in the J as well about the product, you know, and that's understandable because it's a big organization. And they're competing with other sports and so on, you know, very professional sports. But I think there's a room for that, definitely. I think so.
You go back to kids a lot, but my sense of that is that actually adults need to learn to play again.
I think so.
I think that's where, when it's streamlined into, you know, 19 to 30, college kids, essentially, extended youth, and that's your kind of time for that. And then all of a sudden you have to grow up, and it's a kind of maybe 10 years behind, maybe 20 years behind the American model, where if you don't make the top, like, why are you still playing football? Like, if you didn't make it, you didn't make it, so why are you doing playing?
Exactly,
And sometimes I feel that's maybe, and they're starting to get it, there's social hurling initiatives, but it's definitely, there's a great opportunity, I think, to play for adults as opposed to...
Absolutely, and the joy of just playing again, you know, as children, and we learn to play at children. And I have a friend of mine, she's an English teacher, and she was bemoaning the fact that boys, she teaches in an all-boys school in Cork, a secondary school, and she said, they're not reading any books. And I said, that's a disaster, she said. I said, because they're not going to learn empathy. And she said, you know how they learn empathy is from sport. And because there's a big culture in the school about the mental health of the boys, you know, that if you lose, it's not the end of the world. So they're looking after them, you know, in that way. And I was delighted to hear that, you know. It's not win at all costs, you know. Look after them when they lose. Or if they don't make the team or the panel or whatever, That was very heartening, I have to say.
Are we... Do you see the change? Do you see something changing that's working,
Well, I hope so, yeah. And, another person writing an article about Ski na Skull, which is a primary school competition, she contacted me and said, are they too young to be competing at this level in big pitches and so on? I said, no, they're not, but as long as they're protected when they lose or, they don't make the team and so on, as long as there's those protections there and it's not win at all costs, that's the big danger, I think.
Yeah, I remember they were talking about doing away with the under 12. I remember where I was at the moment of it, where I can remember very distinctly where somebody said they're going to do away with the under 12 championship. Now I'd spent 6 years waiting for the under 12 championship.
I know.
And then all of a sudden it was going to be taken away because, well, I didn't know why. It didn't matter to me why anybody wanted to take it away. The fact that they were going to was like really gutting me. Like, I wasn't happy with it because I didn't see, as a 12-year-old, I didn't see what was wrong with it. And I had at that time, I had a very balanced relationship. I just loved to play. So I was like, why would you take that away? You know? I don't know.
The children are not the people who should make those decisions, really. Of course, players, you were a player at 12. You want to play, and you want to compete against other boys as well. But that's not the best decision, for a child to make.
No. I suppose just it's more towards the excessive protection against the darker side of it. So let's not go near it at all.
No,
I feel like you have to kind of you have to feel into the line to know where it is.
And you have to make yourself vulnerable. With poetry, art, music, whatever. There's a danger in making yourself vulnerable. And when you play a game and you compete a game, you're making yourself vulnerable, and as long as we realize that, I think that's the main thing. It's about awareness, really. And there's just one thing I want to read about the World Cup. There's a great book by a Uruguayan writer, Richard Galliano, and he wrote a brilliant book about, it's called Football in Sun and Shadow. It's about the World Cup and about the lack of innocence. And this is years ago. And he said, he dedicated the book, he said, the pages that follow are dedicated to the children who once upon a time, years ago, crossed my path on the Kelela de la Costa. They had been playing football and were singing, we lost, we won, either way we had fun. And it's about fun.
Yeah, I just read that this morning, that's lovely. Is there anything from the beginning of the book that you'd like to read in particular?
I would actually.
I think just because it had such a... I'd be interested to know what, for you, writing, I don't know, as a part of the research, stories gathered, experience you have, like what you mind in writing the book. For me to have such a visceral experience, I suppose I'm wondering, was there anything that stood out for you as a particularly enjoyable piece to write or to research?
Well, Ecstasis is the second essay in the book, and it's about the intensity of emotion in sport, the kind of ecstasy, really, that we experience if we're lucky enough, good or bad. So I'm going to read a few of these experiences I had as a player, as a fan as well. So, you were on a Cork under-16 hurling development team playing against Kerry and Ballyhoig. It is midwinter and freezing cold, and early in the game, snow begins to fall. In that silent, busy, fast, slow, dreamlike way that snow has of just coming and blurring the air and sticking to the wet, dumb ground. You and the other hurlers play on in the quiet whiteness and the normal sounds, the slap of a sliotar into a hand, the pock of a hurley hitting a ball, the crack of a hurley and hurley, the call of a player or a mentor. The normal sounds are not normal, but strange, heightened, and otherworldly. You are subdued by the eeriness that has descended. Boys giving their all in their county jerseys, hurling in the snow. The ball hard and unyielding, your hurleys rigid and strange in your perished hands, your chests heaving, your breaths misting, the goals dimming to distance in the falling snow. Your hair and faces and jerseys softly spike with it, the snow becoming part of the game, falling faintly falling, as Joyce wrote, as you run around in the whiteness hurling, the stamp of your boots making a slight creaking, crunching sound at the edges of the immeasurable white pitch. I'll read a few more. You're playing football for Mallow United down the town park. There's a big home crowd cheering on the team a few feet from the sideline. It's a must-win Tadhg League game against St Mary's, your big rivals. You're playing midfield up against our best player, Martin O'Sullivan, who's heading to the League of Ireland at the end of the season. In the first half, he gets the ball and powers towards the Mallow goal. You track back and chase him down. Somehow you slide in and hook your right foot around the football and win possession. Then pivot to put your body between him and the ball. He drags you down. The crowd bellows outrage and then approval as the referee blows for a free kick. You jump up and run back towards the halfway line. "You fucking good thing, Coakley," Daniel O'Callaghan, your teammate, says, running beside you. Come on, Martin," the St Mary's coach shouts. "Don't let him do that." You breathe deeply. You have this. You're better than him. You know this. You can do anything you want. The winning of the game is yours. Mallow will win, and you will make this happen. Nothing has been ever more certain in your life. You will do this. You. It's your last championship game, hurling game for Mallow in 1991 against Middleton and Castlelyons. It's early in the summer, and you're the captain of the team. The game is drifting into loss. Mallow are 4 points down, but you're desperate for that not to happen. If you're beaten, the summer of hurling is over. All hurling is over. You can't lose. You can't. You make a frantic effort to score a goal, the ball just managing to worm itself into the corner. Now you will score again. Now you will finish the comeback. Moments later, the man marking you turns and puts out his hand for you to shake. "What?" you say. "What's happening?" He looks at you strangely. "It's over, Tadhg," he says. He blew it up. Another Middleton player approaches you. He says, "Hard luck." He looks at you strangely too. You shake hands with him. You have no idea what is happening. All the players are walking off the pitch. You have no idea what is happening. And the last two I'll read is about being a fan. The All-Out Hurling semi-final between Cork and Limerick in Croke Park, 29 July 2018. There has been a sense of unreality in the wash of your emotions all day. The water on Smerrick Harbour is slate grey, waves flecking to surface as you drive past Mount Brandon on your way to Farnfore. A swell of anticipation in the airport, a feeling of belonging, of being among your own. Ease and comfort on the plane, disbelief to be outside a sun-scrubbed Dublin airport at 10 a.m. when moments before you were passing through Milltown and Fireys. Envy, perhaps loss, when overhearing a father and son's intimate conversation on the bus into town. A sense of being blessed, privileged to be walking in O'Connell Street as the Cork and Limerick fans stroll past the multicultural mix that is Dublin these days. Well-being, rightness. A returning, a catching up with old friends over pints, the feeling of identity, of ritual. With Ray, Michael and Kieran in the Palace Bar on Fleet Street. A kind of joy not hindered by the porter while the conversation interlaces itself around you, as natural and full of grace as bird flight. Sean South breaks out from inside the back room. The Limerick lads have begun early. At the old call of the music, your emotions shift from your chest to your gut and swell there. There, from an older place, you can reach outward as well as inward, backwards and forwards. You're charged, heightened, more than yourself. You can see everything, and everything is beautiful. You're standing outside Paddy O'Shea's pub in Ventry. You are trying to reclaim your place in the here and now after 90 minutes of being subsumed inside the torrid 2019 All-Ireland hurling semi-final between Tipperary and Wexford. Sorry, Diarmuid. St. Martin's weave a dreamy thread of air above your head. A benign sun eases away the dark, passionate intensity of the match. When Seamus Canavan scored his transcendent goal after 10 minutes of the game, delaying and delaying and delaying the hit until the ball was at the apex of its third bounce, you felt your breath catch and your heart lose purchase and your ears buzz, and you had to put a hand on the bar counter to steady yourself. From that moment until this one, you have been lost inside the game. its power like a black hole's gravitational pull. Now another version of reality tries to seep back in under the sky and the sun and the sand martins. You breathe. You walk down to the beach to feel sand between your toes and the breeze in your face. There's a regatta below in Countra. The water of the bay is glinting azure. Ever is rising to the south beyond. You close your eyes and listen to children shrieking joyfully in the water. You turn and walk back the way you came. Fuchsia and foxgloves and purple loosestrife and montbretia and bindweed are flowering on the sides of the road. You walk towards Crookvarton under a West Kerry evening sun towards home.
Did Emily Cooper really make sense of the two worlds that you're straddling, that you have a chair in each world, or the initial idea was maybe that you have a chair in neither world when you're a writer and an athlete? Is that, at this stage, is that settled?
I think it's settled now. Yeah, I think it is, yeah. But it's difficult. And other people, have told me the same thing. They want to be part of a collective, and there's an essay called A Collective, and it's a big yearning to belong to something bigger than ourselves. And we do when we engage with sport. But at the same time, I always felt a little bit outside it. And other people have said the same thing, especially writers as well, that they're kind of on the outside looking in. And there's a great scene in the John B. Key play, The Man of Clare, where a man, he's the hero of the team, and he realizes he can't be the hero anymore. He's too old. And he goes to drown himself in the play, and he can't do that either. And he goes back. And the players are, playing music and dancing with local girls in a kind of in a shed. And the man stands outside and he's looking in. And it's, that feeling of being inside and outside at the same time. It's very powerful, but I'm okay with it now.
Yeah. Is it Soura Soura? Has that the same idea of the song? It's Soura Soura. It's like looking down into everybody in carefree spirits, and you've got this analytical mind where you're thinking about maybe the next paragraph or whatever, and you're observing, but you don't really want to be. There's something cold about the observer in a way that you're not in that literal sense at the fire.
And it's the responsibility of the writer too, to observe, and there's a quote, I'll just read it now. It's from a Gaelic footballer from, I'll read it here now. Okay, that's not it, it's the collective. I'll find it here. That he was a goalkeeper for, I think he was Tyrone maybe or something, but I'll find it here in 62. It's Tom McIntyre. He was a Gaelic footballer and a poet and a playwright. He's Cavan, He says, playing football in Cavan was what we called in our business taking refuge in the collective. Everybody loves you, you're part of the crowd, you're on the populated side of the street. But the demand for the writer, the artist, is to be on the deserted side of the street, clear of the collective. You've a far better view of what's going on. You're not marching with the multitude. Is it lonesome? It's lonesome at the start, but there are attendant joys. You're doing what you're supposed to be doing. And I feel that. I'm writing now what I'm supposed to be doing. And when I was a child, I was supposed to be playing sport. Yeah,
sometimes you have to go fully into one, it seems, to be able to come out the other side of it as well, isn't it? There was a couple of things that came out of that, but there's just I guess there's just so much. There's so much triggered by even those small things, because I suppose battling with these things.
But you've been thinking about these things, Diarmuid, and a lot of people don't think about, but you've been thinking about them for a while as well, and in your life choices and so on.
Yeah, I suppose I like John Moriarty's language on that, it's like it's thinking itself through you more than like I'm not sitting down thinking about it. You're just it's that's what's kind of that's what's coming up, you know. There's definitely between, I suppose, one of the areas is between the artist and the hurler, and I feel or the sports person. And I know from if I put on my GA hat, we'll say from our side, and one of the things I experience, and we play a game on the beach on Ventry for the last couple of years. And there's a lot of, as every second person in West Kerry is a potter, a writer, a poet, or whatever, you know. So you have a lot of creative people here. And I feel a lot of creative people run out of the GA because they maybe wore red shoes into the dressing room one day and they were called they were called this and that.
Exactly,
and then they maybe didn't want to kill the fellow up the road as much, so they were kind of surplus to requirements. I feel like on one side, I feel like we're poorer in the organisation for it. That imagine having that art, imagine having that music in the organisation. Like you'd have a completely different, you know, you wouldn't need to go to advertising agencies to advertise. You just ask your, you know, it'd come from ourselves if we were more, if we could bring more of it in, you know. But I get the sense from the art world coming back out now more so that there is a greater curiosity. There are more books, there are more plays, there are more short stories. There's a lot of exploration about the game. Maybe not as much about the organisation, but definitely an interest in the game. I think was it Bacon? Kevin Bacon keeps coming to my head when I think about the artist Bacon, but it's not Kevin Bacon, he's the actor.
Francis Bacon.
When they, and I think his office is preserved maybe in the gallery. And there's,
in Dublin,
there's footballers taken out of context in a sense, in that like they're up jumping to catch a ball and it's stripped back all of the other players and everything else, and he was just playing with the form of the player in full flight. And it seems like the bridge is narrowing. There's a little bit more kind of curiosity on both sides, and there's a little bit more. I think I don't know if it's just my journey with it, but it seems like there's more openness and curiosity.
I think there is, you know, especially in poetry. There's a lot of poetry about sport and playing, you know, games especially, and it's great to explore it, and because you see different sides of it. You know, there's not enough fiction really, but there's a lot of theatre about sports as well. There's a play about Anthony Foley in Limerick last week. You know, I didn't go down and see it now, but it's great to see those things because they're all exploring. And there's a lot of women writing about sport as well, you know, in newspapers, but in fiction as well. And that's great to see as well because, you know, sexism is a big problem in sport.
Yeah, there's a bit in it in the book, and I had a few notes, and I was like, I don't know if I'm going to go, like, and that was the feeling, like, I don't know if I'm going to go down that road with it, because I don't know if it will expose some of my own inherent sexism that comes from, well, that comes from maybe unexamined attitudes, but also comes from a life engaged in very intense level of sport. And I'm very aware, I suppose, that the language, and I lament it in some respects as well, because in a way I want to make my mistakes so I can learn with the Buddhist philosophy at the core of it of right intention. The intention isn't to insult or to offend, the insult is to explore, I suppose, and sometimes it can be hard to explore some of these topics in conversation. Like in a book, I think it can be easier in conversation when it's live, and I'm not talking about for here, but in the social space. It can be very hard to get to the line to understand where your own limitations are, because you get kind of picked up very quickly when there's like labels and lip aids that kind of come from triggers that we've all read, articles about what sexism is and what it's not, you know.
And one of the problems in sport, because it's based on the body, you know, in some sports, men have an advantage. They're bigger, they're more aggressive, they have more testosterone and so on. But and that's a drawback, you know, but because they're separated straight away. It's boys against boys and girls against girls, and that's a drawback in sport, really. And, you know, a lot of the kind of organised sports, you know, were set up and codified in the Victorian time, which you know, society was totally separated altogether, and that's a pity.
Yeah, I think I want to definitely hear from the crowd. I did want to tell you, I suppose, why I'm not sure. The game that we play on the beach on a Sunday, we have a 12-year-old different age groups come in, some teens. We don't go below. It's not like something's definitely lost if you have 10 7-year-olds. You can't have that with men and women, you know. But the shift in philosophy that we've tried to bring in, and it has come in very naturally, is around responsibility, self-responsibility, essentially. So if I'm coming into a tackle against you, I have to take in the knowledge of where you're at physically in your time, your capabilities or whatever, and to know that if I give you a free ride, you don't learn anything. If I go full belt, you probably learn less. But if you can find that optimal zone of learning in each tackle, and so each time if I'm going to go to anybody here, I'm trying to weigh up what their capability is. And I feel like it's a more, just a little bit more conscious version of what that, sometimes people come in who haven't maybe, who can't do that. They're still in the old thinking they're going to get to Croke Park. And what's really interesting about it is the days where the philosophy sits at the core, where the community development, because that's essentially what that is. If I'm more worried about creating the learning for the person in front of me, and if everybody's taking that in, you have community is at the core of the game. Not I need this moment to gratify my need to win. And what tends to happen, and where the feedback comes, the bigger feedback, is something magical will always happen on the days where the energy of the game is good. You know, when people are really in it, and the days where we had one evening, there was 24 people down on the beach for a hurling match, full on. It was really amazing to have a big crowd like that. Beautiful evening, one of the hot days in August. It was a Wednesday evening, couldn't have been any more perfect. But there was 4 or 5 fellas who were just coming in a bit raw and weren't willing or able to create a space big enough in themselves for that to happen. And the feeling that everybody had after, or the feeling that I was feeling, and a few others who played regularly, were like, no magic happened. No, we were dejected almost. Even though everything couldn't have been any more perfect. So I feel like...
And that's that awareness I was talking about earlier. It's just a question of awareness, you know, and not win at all costs. You know, that's the enemy, really.
That's the enemy,
It's about playing,
It's about playing and making a space for the magic to come in.
Exactly.
That's where the ritual is, more than the ceremony of it. Lovely. Thanks very much for listening. I'm sure based on much of what Tadhg has said and read, there may be a couple of questions from anybody in the crowd. I know the Irish are like, oh fucking don't ask me a question. Jesus. Not everybody though.
Hello.
Hello.
I just wanted to ask a question about your process, because you write such beautiful sentences, and I just wondered how long it took you to write the book. And congratulations, it's such a wonderful book, and thanks for such a brilliant interview. My 9-year-old son will be delighted when I tell him that I went to this, because he's big into the hurling, and you know they have a copy of your book at home which they're going to read. So thanks, Tadhg, and thanks, Ian.
It took about 4 years, Olivia. It took longer than I thought, but I was very slow at the beginning, and I wasn't very confident. So I read an awful lot of books about sport, about the philosophy of sport and the sociology of sport especially. And then, you know, there was a big teasing out. I got great advice from Sally Rooney about, she was the editor of the Stingy Fly in 2018, and I pitched a sports essay to her because I know she's very interested in sport. And I said, you know, this is me, and I told her about my sporting background, and I said, what kind of an essay do you want? And she said, we want the personal and the universal at the same time. That's the key for a personal essay. If it's too personal, it's just memoir, it's autobiography, we're not interested in that. And if it's too distant, if it's too universal, it's academic, we're not interested in that. So that my main work in the book, and sometimes I succeed and sometimes I didn't, was to blend the personal and the universal, the subject matter. And I think in the best essays in the book where I went more into the personal and less in the objective, and a lot of people have said that to me. But it took a lot of work, you know, and a lot of anguish, really, because like you, I prefer writing fiction and novels, and we can hide behind the characters then. I want to go back and hide again. Yeah. After this,
I think you're entitled to go back into hiding after
thanks,
after
thanks, yeah.
after bearing. Like that's
Thanks.
the natural way of it. Lovely. Well, Constable.
Hi, I knew you as a scientist.
You did, an environmentalist.
And a very good environmentalist.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, your move from being an athlete to a writer, what part did the academic bit play in it? I mean, could you write these books without being a scientist?
Well, I don't know really. I definitely, and it was working for the Clean Technology Centre that I met yourself, and but definitely a novel or a book, this is about 80,000 words, and it's very hard to organise the amount of information that's in them. And I was a librarian by profession originally, and I learned from being a librarian how to organise information, large amounts of information in coherent ways. And that's a big task of a novelist or a non-fiction writer, is to present the information that can be accepted by the reader. And I learned that as a scientist or as an information specialist in the Clean Technology Centre, writing a lot of reports that went to county councils like yourselves. And so it was a big help, especially in this book, because it's non-fiction. It was a big help.